All right, we'll dive in. I will start by welcoming everyone and thank you for joining. The big change you might notice on the screen is I want to welcome all the folks from TF Earhart, who we have now merged our forces and trying to tackle distribution together. Great company of TF Earhart and Republic together, we think will be stronger together and should bring a lot of resources to all of our collective customers. So welcome aboard. Um, we will cover all the typical things today, but specifically, I want to add tariffs because tariffs are going to be affecting our industry, and I'll tell you what I know right now as we get near the end of the presentation. Otherwise, utility rebates, Inflation Reduction Act, certainly the President's executive orders have created some turbulence on that front, and we want to talk about that. Want to review CEE changes again because that still is a factor. Not a ton of new stuff on A2L updates, but it's becoming more prevalent and we're seeing more information all the time. So I'll share what I do know. And then finally, we'll talk tariffs. I do want to mention that the chat is open. You can put your messages into the chat. And Isabella, our marketing lead here at Republic, is going to be watching that and reminding me when things come in. And we're a smaller group, so don't hesitate to take your mute off and interrupt me at any point to get further details on any topic. This is about learning and understanding what's going on. And if I don't know the answers, I certainly know people who can find them for us, and I'll be happy to track things down. It makes us all a little smarter. So don't hesitate to ask any questions you might have. Utility rebates, not any big changes there. The ComEd and Ameren and Mid-American are all still there. We don't expect that to change. We still see a very small percentage of the contractors taking advantage of them. So um, if you're a TM, remind your customers that they're a tremendous advantage. Certainly reduces the cost of the equipment and gives you some options to get into the heat pump space in the more northern markets and southern markets. Just gets you some relief on the cost of the units. But certainly we want to help and can. Both companies have programs in place to help the customers use these rebates. So please ask your TM and take advantage of these if you're not already. Reduction Act, want to bring you up to date on what we know. This slide refers to the Hardy Toolkit. And if you don't know Hardy, it's the heating, air conditioning, refrigeration distributors of North America. And they put together a really good toolkit, which when we send out the PDFs, the hyperlink will take you right to this site, and you can take the class, you can use the toolkit to get more information and understand what's going on with the Inflation Reduction Act in your world. But right now, it took a pretty good hit from the executive orders, and the two programs that we talk about are the HERE program, the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program, and the Homes Act, which is the Home Efficiency Rebate. The difference is the HERE program is based on simply installing high efficiency appliances and electric appliances. The Homes Act is based on whole home efficiency, and it's a lot more complicated program and not near as prevalent. But both programs in our territory are very limited. If you look at the map here, what you're looking at is rebates available as green, and those programs are in place and working now. Yellow is the programs are approved, but not yet operational. The red, of course, is not participating, and there's no one who hasn't submitted or not received applications yet. So it's all states are signed up for the program with the exception of South Dakota, and they don't want to play. This is for the rebate program, which I feel is the most applicable to our space. And with the executive orders, we think anything in yellow is pretty risky at this point. We don't know that even though the application has been approved and the funding's been approved, the way government funding comes to the states, we're not confident that these states in yellow are going to get the funding. It's going to be very hard to claw back from the green states, but getting it into the yellow states will be tough. So stay tuned. I guess my point at this stage is don't count on any money anytime soon. We'll keep watching it, and if things changes, we'll let you know. But I don't expect Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Kansas, Arkansas, Oklahoma to be seeing any of this funding. Probably unlikely at this point. If you look at the same for the homes map, it's the same story, only just a little more restrictive, only a few states. Wisconsin does have this program up and running. And if you're in Wisconsin, it's a program very similar to what they're already doing. They're just using funding from the homes program to help fund what the utility was already doing. So if you're interested in that, the Wisconsin state government has some pretty good information, and I can get you links to that if that's something that would be valuable to you. Just want to remind everybody that our CEE Consortium of Energy Efficiency defines efficiency levels at which we're going to be able to get 25C tax credits. And there's a few other rebates and utilities across the country that are using this standard. It did change January 1. That was finalized in October of last year. And it used to be that there was a program for ductless and a program for ducted. Now that's one program essentially, but you'll see to the left here and on my screen, Tier 1 and Path A and Path B. Those two paths are designed to work for the two different products, and you have to be able to make these numbers in one of those two paths. We're still getting you information on what is eligible. This was effective January 1 of 2025. There's new programs coming January 2026 as well. So if there's one thing we can count on in our business, it's change, and that certainly is the case with CEE. So keep these close by. We're now at 16 for the 25C tax credit, 16 SEER, and HSPF of 8.5 or 8.0, depending on Path A or Path B. So keep an eye on those as you go. But again, we'll be helping you with 25C tax credit eligible product mixes. I just want to walk through the 25C stuff again and talk about how that's affected by the government's and President Trump's executive orders. Executive orders affect spending. Tax credits are not spending, they're in tax law, and tax law requires congressional action. So at this point, we don't see much changing with 25C. We see it being pretty stable. So these rebates should be in place for the foreseeable future until Congress would take some action. And even at that point, the tax code is always future years. So for 2025, don't expect 25C tax credits to go away. As a reminder, I'm not a tax guy, but I do like to remind people that the forms are there and it's pretty straightforward, and there continues to be confusion on what is eligible and what's not. The 556.95 for 2024 taxes is the form you would use. You fill in what the system costs and what your rebate would be. In this case, it's 30% of the total, or $600 for the furnace. And same thing on the AC side or the heat pump side, but can't be more than 2,000. So on a add-on system, you can get a credit of up to $2,600. That goes through the Schedule 3. Just fill it out very simply. And I've used a median household income from Illinois of $65,000. Your tax liability at that point is what we're looking at, not what you owe, because what you owe has your withholding taken out. The tax credit comes before that withholding. So in this case, we're taking $2,600 off of that $4,332 tax liability. So we're reducing the tax owed to $1,732. That means that you're now getting a $2,268 rebate, $2,268 rebate, as opposed to having to pay $332 after your withholding. So some people get confused on that. It's about your tax liability, not your tax owed. So make sure that you're letting people know that, and the steps, if you're a contractor, offer 25C systems, make sure they're eligible with the new 2025 standards, and explain to the homeowners that they'll take dollars off your taxes if you pay taxes, but only a tax professional can help you for sure. So make sure that you let them know. I recommend having a card for a local tax professional to help, and that is always good to have some business partners in the markets you work. Make sure your 25C ratings are all built into the invoices. So if anybody's looking at that, the tax forms are very clear and they have the invoices right there. And if you have questions, ask your TMs or feel free to ask me as well. A2L refrigerants, what's going on that side? Still recommend the ACCA training that's online. It's easy, it's not expensive. As you can see, I passed it, so it can't be too hard. TF Earhart and Republic both have training available as well. So get your teams up to speed on the product. It is a little different, not much, but there's enough there that you want training on that you don't want to be surprised when you install your first system. Some of the new acronyms we need to be aware of. I'm not going to read through all of these. I just want to have this in your hand. So when we send out the PDF, you can refer back to this. But the global warming potential is what we need to keep talking about, and we'll talk about ozone depletion in a minute. But the other three down there at the bottom right, lower flammability limit, minimum ignition energy, and heat of combustion are pretty important factors. We'll talk in more detail in a minute about those three. But those are the three factors that we really look at in terms of how flammable is our low flammable refrigerants, or A2Ls. And I'll share with you some of those numbers, and that it's going to be more of a factor as we move forward here. So back in the 90s, we brought on 410A to reduce ozone depletion, or ODP. That's why we got into 410A to begin with. And good news is the ozone layer is doing much better now. So we solved that problem, but we increased another problem, and that's global warming. And as you can see, 410A has a global warming potential of 2088. And essentially what that means is putting more carbon into the atmosphere, and that carbon takes a long time to break down. And if you put that into years, well, I'll show you a slide in a minute that goes through that. But what we're doing is three different phases. First is bulk phase down. So we're reducing the amount of 410A that we're making. Technology transition just happened. Manufacturers, as of January 1, cannot make residential light commercial chillers, residential light commercial AC and heat pumps or chillers as of January 25. So we now have to start making them with the lower GWP products. VRF has another year on top of that. So we are a little easier on the VRF side, but everything else is now being manufactured with 454B refrigerant in terms of JCI and Bosch products. Refrigerant management. That's now final, and you shouldn't see any major changes in that for a few years, but the policy is now final. So we're not going to go into great detail now, but as we get closer to it, we'll talk about what that means. The barcoding and record keeping isn't going to happen. We were able to fight that in Congress and got that down. Disposable cylinders will still be allowed. The reclaim mandate's been pushed out to 2029, so that one's a little more clear and still not quite done. And then leak repair detection is coming as well. Storing in vans for refillable cylinders, disposable or non-refillable, the disposable cylinders, angled like this with the pressure valve facing up is fine. Again, the pressure valves in the old 410A systems were burst valves, so they just burst and release the pressure and you didn't have anything else happen. These valves just burp the refrigerant out slowly to equalize the pressure. And if they're facing down, they're going to burp the liquid out. And the flammable liquid in your van is not a good thing. So if you store them upright like this, there's always a little vapor section at the top, and it will burp that vapor, so you don't have the liquid refrigerant. The recovery cylinders, on the other hand, have a valve right in the center at the top, so it's almost impossible to ensure that you don't have some liquid resting upon that valve. So those do need to be stored upright. Of course, if they're empty, they could be stored, but like anything else, it's in a service van, it's best to have a plan and always have everything in its place when you're moving. So I'd recommend figuring out how you're going to store those upright. Flammability, again, A2L, lower flammability and non-toxic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think everyone's heard that. And we're not changing the toxicity to all of our refrigerants. We're just going to that low flammability range. I talked about how long it takes for refrigerants to break down in the atmosphere. 22 is about 13 years before it break down. 410A was 30. So it takes a long time for those carbon atoms to break down. So relative to a normal carbon atom, it's significantly longer. Some of the other refrigerants, R54B is a combination of 32 and R1234YF. And you can see that 1234YF is a very short time. It's actually a couple of weeks before it breaks down. So the R54B is about 4.9 years, so significantly better than 410A. So less damage to the atmosphere and a good thing, but certainly the flammability changes how we look at things. I talked about the lower flammability limit, minimum ignition, and burning velocity. Lower flammability limit means how much do you have to have in a square meter, or think of a square yard, a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot cube. How much do you need to have to start a fire? And for um, the 454B, it's almost the equivalent of a soda can or a beer can, if you will. 12 ounces is pretty close. For propane, it's 2 tablespoons. So a much, much lower amount of refrigerant needed with propane to get things fired up. It takes quite a bit to get the 454 started. Minimum ignition is how much energy does it need to actually get a spark? And for 454B, think of the spark plug for a Shelby Mustang. That's about the energy it puts out, is about 100 millijoules. For propane, I'm not certain, but I think my wife gives me looks that have more energy than that, 0.25 millijoules. But it doesn't take much of a spark is the point to get that started. And burning velocity is how fast it moves. And centimeters per second is a hard thing to imagine, but 5.2 is pretty slow. So it's not necessarily moving fast enough to catch other things on fire, whereas the propane is moving very quickly. And the final thing is it's not that hot when it's burning. So it's about 5 times less hot than propane. So it's not going to catch things on fire as quickly. So all these things are favorable, but that doesn't mean it won't burn. So we need to keep that in mind, stay aware that it is a flammable refrigerant and we need to take precautions, but the risk isn't as great as you might think. Here's the flame testing and what makes it a class 1 versus a class 2. You can see that little edge that's sticking out of that V there is how they test it. And if that refrigerant burns outside of that 90-degree V, then it's a class 2 2L as opposed to a class 1. So that's the testing that takes place. So very low flammability in reality, but it is a little bit more flammable than past refrigerants. Another important note is the refrigerant does not have an odor added to it. So it's not something you're going to smell necessarily. So other testing methods need to take place other than the good old nose. What's new? What's the same? Flammability risks certainly have to follow those standards. Some of the service tech's tools need to be updated. Most have already been. My guess is you'll have very few that aren't already ready because we've been making that change for a while. The third one there, though, is a little more important, the refrigerant sensors in the system, and those we'll talk about a little bit more. And first responder training must take that into effect as well, and we've been talking to fire marshals about that. So it all comes down to concentration, and this is not unlike other refrigerants. If you put too much 410A into a given room, it will slowly build up on the floor and force the oxygen up. So if someone's sleeping in a room and 410A floods that room, it could force all the oxygen up and suffocate some people, which has happened. But A2L changes that risk, and now you have a suffocation and a fire risk. So we look at this home, and it's about an 800 square foot home, maybe 1,000. And this room is 135 square feet. The detection systems become a factor. If you do have a refrigerant refrigeration detection system, refrigerant detection system, you use the entire square footage of the home because it will turn on the um, circulation fan and distribute that refrigerant across the entire home and reduce that risk of fire or suffocation. If you don't have one, you have to take the smallest room. So if we take that 800 square, or that 135 square foot room, we can have a refrigeration system that has 4.3 pounds of refrigerant. This is according to ASHRAE 15.2. So most of us would agree that this home is going to need at least a 2-ton and probably 2.5. If that's the case, we don't make refrigerant systems that can do 2 tons or 2.5 tons with just 4.3 pounds of refrigerant. But if we do have the detection system, an 800 square foot home can have 27 pounds of refrigerant in it. So as you can see, that refrigerant detection system becomes pretty important for the safety and for regulation purposes. So a refrigerant detection system, according to ASHRAE 15.2, must be tested in installation. And we strongly recommend this, finding a way to test and document it. So if anybody ever comes back at you, you have some historical documentation. Needs to energize the blower for circulation, and the manufacturers are doing that. It also says in the 15.2 that it should activate required mechanical ventilation. Most manufacturers haven't not added this to their refrigerant detection system, so it's important to check with your local code enforcer to see what they're going to do locally. I don't think most will worry about the ventilation if you have the circulation, but it's important to check because you don't want to be on the wrong side of that inspection. Should open any zoning dampers so you're getting full circulation. And of course, if there's any electric heaters in the duct, we need those to shut off because that's certainly a place where ignition could happen. This is the guidelines for adding a coil to an existing furnace. And again, I just wanted to call out, manufacturers are going to have good instructions on this, and JCI does, and Bosch also does. But you want to make sure that the refrigerant detection system is tested. Find out what the requirements are and go through that test procedure and document it on your installation documentation. And worst case scenario, if there ever is a fire, you want to have that documentation proving that that testing was done. Residential checklist. This is from the ACA training. Does the system have an RDS or LDS, leak detection refrigerant detection system? Will the fan run continuously or just in the call for heat? Is the system ducted or ductless? Does it have one or multiple indoor units? Does the system have shutoff valves? A little bit more for commercial, but good to know. And then finally, can continuous ventilation be added to the system? So a lot of different options there. Good thing to have in your checklist just to make sure your records are showing the right information. I call this up only because in the scenario where you're using a multi-headed ductless system, that system in this application probably is a 2.5, or 3-ton system. And if you have an indoor unit in bedroom 2 there, which is that 800 square foot room, chances are good all that refrigerant could dump into that room. So make sure you're following manufacturer guidelines on how to manage and mitigate that risk. JCI does have a really good duct or a RDS calculator. It's an industry leading tool. You can go in and on any commercial or residential job, identify the need for an RDS. Most residential systems going forward are going to have RDSs. That is pretty much an agreement in the industry that will happen. Commercial is a little bit different. The rules are a little more unique there, and certainly can be addressed with this tool. So if you're interested, you can either shoot the QR code right now, or you can, when we send out the PDF, this will be there and you can shoot it when you get the PDF. All right, preparation for installs. Take the training either with TF Earhart or Republic, or you can do the ACA training online like I did. I recommend it. It's pretty solid and quick, and you can do it in your own home. It's easy. Update your tools. Make sure you're getting training on your brands, RDS and LDS. And obviously, we know there's ductless brands, there's traditional brands, sometimes there's second brands. Make sure you understand each one because they're slightly different. Incorporate processes including checklists and testing, and understand how ventilation is going to happen. Assign an application expert in your business who understands what ASHRAE 15.2 actually says and can interpret what special cases might need. And then finally, learn and use the DS Solutions app RDS calculation tool. So somebody in the company who can apply that to residential and commercial jobs when it's needed. Most important for contractors in my mind is talk to your AWJ. And what's an AWJ? An authority with jurisdiction. Who is the person in your market or markets who has the authority to say that passes inspection or that does not? Now's the time to reach out to them and ask how they're going to be inspecting or how they suggest systems should be installed. If they're going to require ventilation, that's something you should know now, not later. So good time to ask those questions and find out what they're thinking and how they're interpreting that code. Tariffs. Right now, we have a 25% tariff on all products coming from Canada and Mexico, but it's currently paused for 30 days. We're halfway through that. I've been asking what the status is and what likely is going to happen in 2 weeks, and I'm not getting any good feedback yet. It's not clear. The 10% on Chinese products is in place, and that happened February 4th at 12:01 a.m. It used to be there was a code called de minimis treatment of goods, meaning if it was less than $800, there'd be no tariffs. That's been taken off. So anything coming from China is getting that extra 10% on top of what was already there. We don't know what will happen with Canada and Mexico. We're watching it closely to see. The important thing to note that the values imported for our business was about 23.6 billion in 2023. Don't have the numbers yet for 2024, but that 23.6 billion represents 25% of all the purchases contractors made in 2023. China, Mexico, and Canada represent somewhere around 66% of all those imports. So 16% of all the purchases of contractors are affected by these three initiatives. So we're watching them closely. We're concerned about it. We don't know what effect it's going to have on pricing. We don't know what effect it's going to have on how much manufacturers will shift manufacturing to this country. So we'll watch it, and when we hear more, we'll tell you. And this call will happen again March 12th next month, and we should know a lot more about the Mexico and Canada issues. And Mexico is certainly a lot more concerning to us because we have a lot of products manufactured there, and we're watching that carefully. So we'll continue to do so, but as of right now, no major changes. The Chinese tariffs will be a factor, but there's a lot of inventory in the channel, so we probably won't see a change for a little while. Additional resources always available: the IRA Toolkit, the 454B white papers, the EPA Data Hub. Those links will be in the PDFs we send out, so feel free to take advantage of those. Some good videos online, the York and Luxair websites that we recommend to talk about low GWP refrigerants and what that means. So take advantage of that, and absolutely join us again. But we will be sending a recording of this so you can share it with other people on your team or for the TMs with different customers. And we always send out a PDF of the slides so you can refer back to them and use them for your own needs. I will take any questions if you have them. I don't see any in the chat. So any other questions before we wrap this one up? All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to me separately. Otherwise, we'll do this again in a month. Thanks all. Bye-bye.